The blood had dried by the time anyone found him. Inside a modest Santa Monica apartment in November 1981 lay the body of William Holden, one of the most beloved movie stars of Hollywood's golden age. Shockingly, he had been dead for days, and it was a deeply sad scene, a far cry from the glittering fame and romance that had defined his life. Friends were stunned. How could the charming leading man who once conquered Hollywood die so alone, so tragically? This is the full, untold story of a Midwestern boy turned Academy Award winner, a man whose dazzling smile concealed both tumultuous passions and dark, dark secrets. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. William Holden's all-American image began in an appropriately all-American setting. He was born William Franklin Beadle, Jr. on April 17, 1918, in the small town of O'Fallon, Illinois. His mother, Mary, was a school teacher. His father, William Sr., an industrial chemist with ink-stained hands and a stubborn work ethic. William Sr. suffered from chronic lung problems, and the family doctor prescribed a change of air. California, he said, would give them sunshine, citrus groves, and no pollen. So when young Bill was just 3, the Beatles packed up and followed the great American migration west, chasing a better life under the endless blue sky. Settling in the sun-struck suburbs of Los Angeles, Holden's childhood was, by all accounts, comfortable and close-knit. But that wholesome Midwestern veneer only ran so deep. Even as a boy, Bill seemed to have too much voltage running through him, a daredevil current that refused to sit still. Once, just to impress his friends, he walked on his hands across the railing of Pasadena's notorious Side Bridge, 12 feet up and one wobble away from the evening papers. It was the sort of bravado that would later make him magnetic on screen and occasionally a hazard off it. He found his first real thrill in acting during his teen years. Blessed with the resonant voice and the rare kind of natural ease people either have in spades or never will, he lit up school plays and began to suspect there might be something in this performing business after all. By 20, while studying at Pasadena Junior College, he was performing with a local theater group when Destiny, wearing a fedora and a studio badge, walked through the door. A Paramount Pictures scout named Milt Lewis caught one of Holden's performances. He was playing an elderly man, complete with gray makeup and shaky gait, and nearly fell over when the old-timer turned out to be a handsome college kid. Lewis saw a star, that mix of charm and authenticity that could carry a camera. He arranged a screen test, and soon the great studio machinery began to hum. Paramount signed him in 1938, and with a few strokes of the publicity department's pen, William Franklin Beadle, Jr. became William Holden. A Paramount executive reportedly chose the surname in tribute to actress Gloria Holden. It sounded clean, American, and frankly a lot more marquee-ready than Bill Beadle. But the makeover from small-town Beadle to Hollywood Holden wasn't as effortless as it looked in the glossies. He picked up a couple of small roles in 1939, still finding his footing, when Columbia Pictures began hunting for a lead in Golden Boy, a boxing drama about a violinist turned prizefighter. After testing half of young Hollywood, director Ruben Mamoulian landed on Holden's screen test and saw something he could mold. Columbia borrowed the newcomer from Paramount, betting he could handle a complex part that required equal parts tenderness and toughness. On set, it almost fell apart. Holden was green, nervous, and stiff before the camera. Columbia's infamously volcanic boss, Harry Cohn, wanted him gone. But fate, or more accurately, Barbara Stanwyck, intervened. Stanwyck, already a seasoned star, took a liking to the kid and refused to watch him sink. She ran lines with him, coaxed him through scenes, and when Cohn threatened to fire him, she stormed into his office and delivered an ultimatum: fire Holden and she'd walk. The bluff worked. Bill steadied himself, found his rhythm, and by the time Golden Boy hit theaters, audiences fell for the sincerity in his eyes and the quiet vulnerability behind the muscle. Overnight, he went from anonymous contract player to Hollywood's newest and quite literal Golden Boy. He never forgot Stanwyck's faith in him. Every April 1st for years after, Holden sent her a bouquet with a handwritten note. "Thank you for making my career possible." Off-screen, life began to accelerate in that glamorous, slightly chaotic way peculiar to young stars. While filming Invisible Stripes in 1939, a gritty gangster picture opposite Humphrey Bogart, Holden met a beautiful actress named Brenda Marshall. Marshall was no ingenue. She was elegant, sharp, and already navigating the Hollywood carousel. Bill was instantly taken. There was one small complication. She was married. But Hollywood love stories rarely wait for the credits to roll. Holden bided his time, and when Marshall's divorce was finalized, he wasted none of it. The romance flared fast, and in July 1941, barely weeks after her decree, he impulsively suggested they elope to Las Vegas. It sounded like the stuff of fan magazine fantasies. In practice, it played more like a cheap screwball comedy. A delayed film shoot made him miss their chapel appointment. By the time they finally arrived, the minister was home in his pajamas. Unwilling to let scheduling kill the mood, the couple dragged him out of bed and were married in a cramped hotel room after midnight. Not exactly Hollywood's vision of happily ever after. In any case, at 23, William Holden was suddenly a husband and a father. Marshall had a young daughter from her first marriage whom Bill adopted as his own. The boy from O'Fallon had officially joined America's favorite myth: handsome young actor, beautiful wife, instant family. What no one could see yet was the fault line running beneath that perfect studio portrait. I'd like to take a moment to remind you about the Hollywood Mysteries merch store, which I've linked on screen now and in the description. I have a range of fantastic shirt designs available, many of which feature actors and actresses from the golden age of cinema. I've got William Powell, Marlene Dietrich, Paula Negri, Anna May Wong, and Rudolph Valentino, among many others. You can check out the designs by clicking the link. All the shirts come in a wide range of sizes and colors. They ship from the US, EU, UK, Canada, Japan, Brazil, and Australia, and they start at just $25. Thank you so much to all of you who have picked up a shirt already. I'm delighted at all the positive feedback about their quality and the designs. If you're looking to get some Christmas shopping done and want a gift for the movie buff in your life, then I think one of these shirts would be a guaranteed hit. But now, on with the Bill Holden Show. No sooner had Holden settled into married life than the world caught fire. In 1942, the 24-year-old actor hit pause on his promising career and enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Forces. Like many young men of his generation, he was itching to swap grease paint for gun oil, but Hollywood's new golden boy was considered too valuable to risk at the front. Instead, he spent the war years making training films, touring with the USO, and boosting morale on dusty air bases. Noble work, perhaps, but not the kind of heroism he'd imagined. He was patriotic, and it gnawed at him. The feeling only deepened when the war claimed something far dearer than fame. His younger brother, a fighter pilot, was shot down and killed over the Pacific in 1944. The news crushed him. Holden was tormented by guilt, safe in California while his brother vanished into salt water and the silence of death. Friends said something inside him dimmed that year, a shadow that never quite left his eyes. When the guns finally quieted in 1945, Bill returned home determined to restart his career and to be the kind of father and husband the studio magazines could write glowing profiles about. He and Brenda soon welcomed 2 sons in quick succession, Peter in 1943, Scott in 1946, and Holden leaned into family life. He posed for cheerful publicity photos, the picture of post-war domestic bliss, pipe in hand, children on his knee, the Hollywood lawn perfectly manicured. But re-entry to the movie business was rougher than expected. The war had shifted public taste, and the roles being offered were bland, square-jawed heroes in middling pictures. Holden found himself stranded in a no-man's land of B-movies, with his name slipping lower on the poster each year. Adding insult to ego, Brenda's own career was flourishing. She was out-earning him $5 to 1. It stung. In a gesture of 40s machismo, he asked her to step back so he could play breadwinner. She obliged, but his own career wasn't yet ready to fill that gap. Work trickled in. Studio executives whispered that the Golden Boy's shine had dulled. Privately, Bill was feeling the strain. The self-assured cool he projected on screen wasn't always easy to summon in real life. Ever since Golden Boy, he'd taken a small drink before shooting to calm his nerves. A shot of courage, he joked. By the late 1940s, that ritual had evolved into a daily companion. On the set of 1948's Rachel and the Stranger, Loretta Young noticed him reaching for the bottle too often and gave him one of her famous no-nonsense warnings. Holden laughed it off, but something had taken root. The gap between his public ease and private anxiety was beginning to widen, and liquor, for now, bridged it. Then, at the turn of the decade, fortune swung back his way. Billy Wilder, a man with good radar for the conflicted soul beneath a clean smile, came calling. In 1950, Wilder offered Holden the lead in Sunset Boulevard, a dark and barbed Valentine to Hollywood's broken dreams and fallen angels. The role of Joe Gillis, a cynical screenwriter seduced and destroyed by an aging silent star, was unlike anything Bill had touched previously. After years of polite romantic leads, this was a chance to dig into something jagged and real. He was thrilled and terrified. It was the kind of part that could resurrect a career or bury it for good. On set, Wilder's meticulous direction drew out a new depth in him, and occasionally a little too much enthusiasm. During one love scene with Gloria Swanson, Holden got so swept up in the moment that he kept kissing her long after Wilder had shouted cut. Then a second sharper voice echoed the same call to cut. It was Brenda's. She dropped by the soundstage that day, and what she saw did not amuse her one bit. It was a mortifying, albeit comic moment that only hinted at the turbulence to come in their marriage. When Sunset Boulevard opened later that year, critics and audiences alike were stunned. Holden's voiceover, which was simultaneously laconic, bitter, and mordantly funny, became part of film history. As Joe Gillis, he revealed something darker, more human, and far more interesting than the clean-cut boy next door of his early career. Billy Wilder had found his perfect conduit for American disillusionment, and the Academy took notice. Holden had arrived, but success, as usual, demanded its toll. Brenda, who had willingly dimmed her own career, bristled now as her husband's fame outgrew hers by tenfold. At the Academy Awards, when Holden lost the Best Actor statue to Jose Ferrer, she reportedly muttered that the right man won. The jab landed harder than she knew. The glamorous couple that the public adored was already fraying at the edges. Bill tried to keep up appearances, smiling for the cameras, showing up at premieres, playing the part of the dutiful husband, but at home the silences were lengthening. Meanwhile, on set, Holden was loosening up in an entirely different way. Filming Born Yesterday, a fizzy 1950 comedy, he bonded with co-star Broderick Crawford over a shared dislike of Columbia boss Harry Cohn. The two actors developed a mischievous ritual, slipping away between takes to, quote, get gloriously sloshed on Paramount's dime, running up bar tabs purely to spite Cohn's penny-pinching wrath. It was a sort of petty rebellion that made them laugh and made Bill feel, for the first time, untouchable. He was no longer the nervous kid Barbara Stanwyck had once protected. Now he carried himself with a breezy, slightly dangerous confidence. Hollywood, fickle as ever, loved him for it. Holden's hot streak rolled on. In 1953, he reunited with Wilder for Stalag 17, a World War II prisoner-of-war drama laced with cynicism and gallows humor. At first, he nearly turned it down, claiming the stage play had bored him senseless. Wilder, amused, told him to trust the screenplay, and Holden did. To inhabit Sergeant Sefton, a jaded schemer among POWs, Holden even experimented with a crude version of method acting, staying aloof and irritable between takes to keep himself in character. He even shocked himself by berating an entire crew on set for making too much noise, shocking everyone, including himself. It was something otherwise totally out of character for Bill, who was always much loved by the working people in cinema. But he was pushing for something extra in this picture. It wasn't exactly Montgomery Clift territory, but it gave his performance a rough, modern edge. When the film premiered, audiences saw something new. Holden had evolved from Hollywood's amiable everyman into its most reluctant anti-hero. The hard work paid off. When Stalag 17 hit cinemas, Holden's performance earned rave reviews, and in the spring of 1954, the Academy Award for Best Actor. Standing on that stage, golden statue in hand, the 35-year-old actor looked every inch the conquering hero. Yet even on that shining night, the air around him was starting to curdle. History has ever had a wicked sense of déjà vu. Brenda Holden couldn't resist cutting him down to size, reportedly mocking his win as much as she'd jeered at his prior loss as they drove home from the ceremony. The fight turned ugly. In a burst of anger, Holden swerved into the driveway too hard, crunching their car against the stone wall. He sat there, white-knuckled and silent, while the world's newest Oscar winner stared at the wreckage of his marriage. The Golden Boy's fairy tale was beginning to crack at the edges. He didn't have to look far for escape. During the shooting of Sabrina later that same year, Holden met the woman who would haunt him for the rest of his life. Audrey Hepburn was Hollywood's freshest miracle, a 24-year-old with elfin features and a kind of purity the town hadn't seen since the early silent era. Fresh off her Oscar for Roman Holiday, she'd been cast as the chauffeur's daughter turned Cinderella to Holden's debonair playboy, David Larrabee. From the first day on set, sparks flew, irresistibly. Before I even met her, I had a crush on her, Holden later admitted. After one day, I felt as if we were old friends. The feeling was mutual. Audrey, disciplined by nature, tried to resist his charm. She'd heard the stories about Bill's wandering eye, but between takes the resistance melted. Soon they were inseparable, two impossibly photogenic souls colliding under Billy Wilder's knowing smirk. The affair was passionate, but it had to stay hidden. Studio morality clauses were strict. One whiff of scandal could kill a career. So Bill and Audrey met behind closed doors, sharing martinis in his dressing room where Wilder pretended not to notice. So long as the chemistry stayed alive on screen, he wasn't about to interfere. Meanwhile, their co-star Humphrey Bogart drank alone in the corner and fumed. He'd wanted his wife, Lauren Bacall, to play Sabrina, and he distrusted Holden from the start. The grudge went back years to a near-deadly incident on the 1939 set of Invisible Stripes. Holden had almost flipped a malfunctioning motorcycle, with Bogart in the sidecar. Bogey had jumped clear just in time and later told people the kid had tried to kill him. Holden shrugged it off, joking, "Well, maybe I almost did, but accidentally." Bogart wasn't laughing then, and he sure wasn't laughing now. On Sabrina, he kept to himself and glaring at the younger pair's off-camera affection. He called Sabrina that crock of crap, but the finished film sparked despite him, including his own fine performance. For Holden and Hepburn, though, Sabrina was more than a hit. It was a profound romance. By the end of filming, Bill was besotted. One night, overcome by the kind of sincerity that usually terrified him, he got down on one knee and proposed. The moment was heartbreakingly earnest, Hollywood's notorious womanizer suddenly acting like a man who'd finally found the real thing. But Audrey hesitated. She loved him, yes, but she wanted children more than anything. Holden, swallowing hard, told her the truth. It was impossible. Years earlier, he'd had a vasectomy. He and Brenda had agreed their family was complete. He hadn't imagined it would cost him the love of his life. Audrey was devastated. A friend later said she looked at him like a hurt, bewildered child. She ended the affair soon after, in tears. Holden, shattered, later admitted simply, "I really fell in love with Audrey Hepburn." For the rest of his days, he'd call her the great love of his life, and the one that got away. Hepburn, reeling, turned back toward stability. Within months, she rekindled her romance with actor Mel Ferrer, and soon became engaged. Hollywood was keen to tidy up the mess, so the bigwigs orchestrated a bit of theater for public consumption. In a final indignity, Paramount arranged for Audrey to announce her engagement at a dinner party, held at the Holden home. Brenda, playing hostess, smiled for the cameras. Bill, glass in hand, did his best impression of a gracious friend. It was a dinner soaked in nerves, desire, betrayal, and unspoken pain. 4 people pretending life was simpler than it was, while hearts quietly splintered under the studio lights. But Holden was not the brooding type. On the contrary, he declared to friends that he would, quote, set around the world with the idea of screwing a woman in every country. It sounded like a joke, and maybe it was, but he did his level best to make it true. By 1954, while Sabrina was charming audiences, Holden was already on location in England filming The Bridges at Toko Rai, another war picture. Offset, he found a new diversion, his co-star Grace Kelly. Kelly, 25, was beautiful and elegant, and like Hepburn, drawn to the sadness that flickered beneath Holden's charm. Their fling unfolded across London and Tokyo, trailed by gossip columnists and whispers. When the Supreme Gutter Rag Confidential magazine broke the story, splashing their illicit tryst across the tabloids, both stars issued stern denials, then carried on the affair in private. Holden was genuinely taken with Grace, and even spoke of marriage, but religion proved the unbridgeable gap. She was a devout Catholic. He famously refused to let any church dictate what I could do with my life. By the following year, Grace Kelly was engaged to Prince Rainier of Monaco, and Holden's fantasy dissolved in champagne bubbles. Hollywood's most desirable man had lost two of its most desirable women in as many years. Professionally, though, the mid-1950s were a golden time. By 1955, William Holden was the #1 box office draw in America, his name synonymous with a certain kind of modern masculinity, handsome, haunted, and just a little dangerous. He starred in Love is a Many-Splendored Thing, playing a war correspondent swept into a doomed Hong Kong romance, a role that felt almost autobiographical. That same year, he scorched the screen in Picnic, playing Hal Carter, the shirtless drifter who sends small-town hearts fluttering. When he danced with Kim Novak against the sunset to Moonglow, moviegoers practically melted in their seats. Teenagers taped his pictures to their bedroom walls. Critics called him the most complete actor of his generation. However, his marriage to Brenda had devolved into an open charade. Both husband and wife took lovers as they pleased by this point. Friends privately described Brenda as embittered by Bill's infidelities and fame, but unwilling to let go of her status as Mrs. William Holden. They kept up appearances for society events, even playing host to Ronald and Nancy Reagan's 1952 wedding at their Toluca Lake home, but the marriage was over in all but name. In 1957, Holden notched another landmark film with David Lean's The Bridge on the River Kwai. As an American POW amidst a cast of top-tier British actors, he held his own and then some. Holden struck a deal to be paid a percentage of Kwai's profits over time rather than a lump sum. The movie became an international blockbuster, meaning Holden was set to collect checks for years. But he shrugged off the notion that Kwai made him comfortable for life. It seemed like a good idea at the time, Holden laughed later, but by the time I give 10% to my agent, 70% to the government, and split the rest with an ex-wife, there's not much left. It was a joking reference to Brenda, with whom he'd soon have to literally split his fortune. Still, whatever he might jokingly protest, being the star of Bridge on the River Kwai made Holden incredibly wealthy. He reportedly earned over $2.5 million from the film, an astronomical sum in the late 1950s. Flush with cash and wanting a breather from the Hollywood glare, he moved his family to Switzerland, and so joined the post-war trend of American stars living European high life. The Alpine air did little to mend the rift with Brenda, but it gave Holden a taste for life beyond the confines of Los Angeles. His wandering spirit, once awakened, would drive him to increasingly far-flung places, and eventually, into the African wilderness that would become his unexpected second act. As the 1960s dawned, William Holden found himself at a crossroads. His star power showed signs of waning after a few lackluster projects, and his personal life was a powder keg of unresolved tensions. Perhaps that's why in 1961, he jumped at an offer to film on an entirely different continent, far from gossip columnists and his wife. In late 1961, Holden traveled to colonial Kenya to shoot The Lion, an adventure film about big game hunters. The trip would prove fateful in more ways than one. On location amidst the sweeping savannas of East Africa, Holden felt an unexpected sense of freedom. He fell in love, not only with the land and its wildlife, but with a luminous French fashion model turned actress named Capucine, his co-star. Capucine was elegant, exotic, and nearly 20 years his junior. Their chemistry was instant. At night, under African skies, Holden romanced her with all the passion of a much younger man. By now, he and Brenda were living separate lives, but Brenda visited him in Kenya, if only to keep up appearances. The ruse failed. The Lion crew couldn't miss the tension when Brenda arrived and found her husband infatuated with the willowy Capucine. One overheard blowout argument between the Holdens ended with Brenda storming off in tears, while Capucine maintained a cool distance on set. When filming wrapped, Holden did not return home a dutiful husband. Instead, he extended his African sojourn, indulging his newfound interest in the continent. He and his friends bought a swath of land near Mount Kenya and opened an exclusive resort, the Mount Kenya Safari Club, in 1959. It was a playground for the international jet set. Winston Churchill and Prince Rainier were among early guests, but also a money-losing one. Holden didn't mind. It was an escape. He would spend weeks at the Safari Club hosting his Hollywood pals on lavish safaris by day and cocktail-fueled parties by night. With a rifle in one hand and a highball in the other, Holden played the great white hunter living out Ernest Hemingway fantasies. This was far from a respectful attempt to understand the natural and human elements of the continent, and rather a rich movie star obnoxiously using Africa as a plaything. The word conservation wasn't in his vocabulary. He was in Kenya to hunt big game for sport, which was already a bad look even by the 1960s. However, Kenya would change his ways eventually, but that wouldn't come until later in life. Returning to Hollywood, Holden was in for a rocky ride. He was contracted to star opposite Hepburn again in the comedy Paris When It Sizzles, a production as tense as Sabrina, albeit for different reasons this time. Filmed in 1962, it languished unreleased until 1964, by which time its surreal, boozy humor felt painfully outdated. Bill himself was a major cause of the tension and delays. Anxious about reuniting with Audrey on screen, he started hitting the bottle harder than ever. He never drank more than on the set of Paris When It Sizzles, his biographer noted. At one point, production halted so Holden could dry out in a clinic, and Tony Curtis was brought in for a prolonged cameo to cover his absence. Whatever flicker of romantic chemistry remained between Holden and Hepburn, it did not reignite. Audrey was happily married and a mother by then, and Holden was in a self-destructive spiral. In a pathetic echo of their Sabrina days, a very intoxicated Bill attempted a grand gesture. Late one night in 1962, he tried to climb up the outside of Audrey's Paris hotel to reach her second-floor window. Instead, he slipped and fell to the ground, narrowly avoiding serious or even fatal injury. Miraculously, he stumbled away with only bruises and wounded pride. Audrey was not impressed with this version of Bill, who seemed to have fallen far from the boyish charmer she had once loved. Bill's drinking was quickly becoming a full-blown addiction. In 1964, while shooting The Seventh Dawn in Malaysia with Capucine, his self-destruction reached a crisis. He openly flaunted his rekindled affair with Capucine on set. Brenda was half a world away by then, and spent nearly every evening in an alcoholic haze. Finally, one afternoon, his body gave out. Holden collapsed unconscious, poisoned by liquor and exhaustion. He was rushed back to a hospital in Lausanne, Switzerland, near the family home. In a rather awkward vigil, both Brenda and Capucine flew in to sit at his bedside. When Holden came to, pale and shaken, he made a painful decision that was long overdue. He turned to Brenda and quietly told her that their marriage was over. After 23 tumultuous years, William and Brenda Holden would finally separate for good. Their divorce would not be finalized until 1971, but from 1964 on, they lived entirely separate lives. He was done with romance, a friend said of Holden at this juncture, but they evidently meant done with the constraints of marriage. In fact, Bill Holden was far from done with romance. He just wanted his freedom. Freed from domestic responsibilities, Holden drifted through the mid-1960s both physically and emotionally. The roles he took reflected a star casting about. A missionary priest in Satan Never Sleeps, a World War II spy in The Counterfeit Traitor, a Civil War cowboy in Alvarez Kelly opposite Richard Widmark. Solid performances, but none exactly captured the zeitgeist of the swinging 60s. By 1966, whispers spread that William Holden was washed up. Some even speculated he was gravely ill. His hard living had certainly prematurely aged his boyish face into one lined with care. One vicious rumor claimed he had terminal lung cancer, but this was false. The truth was that Holden's reckless habits were catching up to him in other ways, and the tabloid vipers could smell blood. And then, as if to prove them right, came a night of reckoning that forever tarnished the Golden Boy's image. On the evening of July 26, 1966, Bill was driving along a coastal road near Pisa, Italy, when disaster struck. Speeding through the dark reportedly after an evening of drinking, he lost control of his vehicle and slammed head-on into another car. The collision was brutal. Holden's heavy Chrysler plowed the smaller Italian car into oncoming traffic, crushing it. The driver, a local man, was killed almost instantly upon impact. Holden himself crawled out, bloodied but alive, into the chaos of flashing lights and blaring sirens. The Italian authorities did not care that he was a Hollywood star. They charged William Holden with manslaughter for the death of the other driver. In the glare of international press, a devastated Bill faced the consequences of his actions. Italian courts would later hand him an 8-month suspended sentence for vehicular manslaughter, sparing him prison but guaranteeing his fall from grace. The tragedy shook him to his core. At 48, William Holden had taken a man's life. An accident, yes, but one that likely would not have happened were it not for his intoxication and careless driving. Friends say he was haunted by guilt from that day forward. After the accident, Holden abruptly left Europe and retreated to the one place he still found peace, the open spaces of Africa. He relocated to a penthouse in Palm Springs that reminded him of the velvet air of the Kenyan highlands, and from there he began plotting a new path. The very crash that nearly destroyed him ended up catalyzing a profound change. Driving through East Africa on safari in 1967, Holden was struck not by the thrill of the hunt, but by the fragility of the wildlife he'd once slaughtered for sport. He noticed fewer elephants, fewer rhinos, and learned that poaching and habitat loss were taking a toll. So Holden did something remarkable. He bought 1,200 acres of land in Kenya surrounding his safari club and established the Mount Kenya Game Ranch, one of the first private conservation sanctuaries in East Africa. The big game hunter evolved into a committed wildlife conservationist virtually overnight. Not everyone understood it, but Bill didn't care. He poured money and energy into the game ranch, rerouting migratory trails to avoid human conflict, funding education centers for Kenyan youth about poaching, and helping reintroduce endangered species like rhinos into the wild. Those closest to him saw a man fervently trying to undo some of the harm he'd witnessed, and perhaps to quiet his own inner turmoil. Hollywood wasn't done with William Holden yet, though. In 1969, Sam Peckinpah cast him in The Wild Bunch. This was a ferocious Western that would become a classic of the new violent cinema. The film's bloody climax shocked audiences and polarized critics, but Holden's performance was world-weary, restrained, and tinged with regret. He was the perfect anti-hero for the time. At the movie's press conference premiere, outraged critic Rex Reed stood up and demandingly asked the filmmakers, why was this film made? Reed was scandalized by its gore. A jet-lagged Holden, who'd just flown in from another shoot, nearly walked out on the spot rather than defend the movie. But the truth is that the moralizing attitude of the likes of Reed was passé, and New Hollywood wasn't holding back any longer. The Wild Bunch reintroduced Holden to a younger generation as a grizzled elder statesman of cool, and from there his career enjoyed a modest resurgence. He found steady work in the early 1970s in disaster epics like The Towering Inferno and some smaller character studies. There was a sense that William Holden had survived his own wild bunch of troubles and come out the other side a lot wiser. On a fall day in 1972, in the unlikely setting of a New York City bookstore, Bill's life took another turn, this time for the better. Browsing the travel section, Holden struck up a conversation with a striking red-headed actress he recognized, Stephanie Powers, then in her early 30s and on the cusp of TV stardom. Powers was thumbing through a guidebook about Kenya, of all things. That was all the invitation Holden needed. An enthusiastic evangelist for Africa by now, he invited her to visit his Mount Kenya game ranch to see the conservation work that had become his passion. Stephanie accepted, setting in motion an 8-year romance that would become one of the most stable and fulfilling relationships of Holden's life. Stephanie Powers was nearly 25 years Holden's junior, but she had a maturity and lust for life that complemented him. Unlike the high society actresses of Holden's past, Powers was down-to-earth and adventurous. She shared his love of nature and soon became deeply involved in the wildlife projects at Mount Kenya. More importantly, Stephanie confronted Bill's worst habit head-on. By the 1970s, Holden's alcoholism was an entrenched disease. Powers encouraged and sometimes insisted that he attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and under her influence he managed extended periods of sobriety. Energized by love, Holden entered what can be seen as a late career renaissance. In 1967, director Sidney Lumet cast the 58-year-old Holden in Network, Paddy Chayefsky's scathing satire of the news media. As Max Schumacher, a jaded TV executive, Holden delivered one of the finest performances of his life. It earned him his final Academy Award nomination, and in fact, he lost to his Network co-star Peter Finch, who won posthumously. That same year, he and Stephanie traveled the globe, sometimes for pleasure, sometimes for conservation work. They visited remote villages, started a joint business selling local artisans' crafts, and generally lived life to the fullest. He idealized indigenous people as a last frame of reference for the simple word mankind. Powers said of Holden's almost spiritual appreciation for different cultures. The couple even referred to their conservation projects as the child we never had. In 1980, Holden reunited with Sunset Boulevard director Billy Wilder for Fedora, a smaller film that didn't make much noise, and co-starred in Blake Edwards' Hollywood satire S.O.B. in 1981. Publicly, he was in good spirits. On talk shows, he spoke passionately not of acting but of wildlife conservation, often steering interviews toward the plight of African animals. With a chuckle, he offered TV hosts great interviews with gorillas if it would help drum up interest in the cause. In 1980, he finally allowed a film crew into the Mount Kenya game ranch to showcase the work being done there. Footage from that visit shows Holden tanned, relaxed, and proud as he tours the camera around his beloved sanctuary. Still handsome at 62, he talks of rescuing rhinos and setting aside land for the next generation of conservationists, concluding earnestly, "There's going to be a day when I don't feel like doing it anymore." Tragically, he was more prescient than he knew. In the autumn of 1981, Bill returned to Southern California while Stephanie was away filming her TV series, Heart to Heart. Left to his own devices, the old demons crept back in. He began drinking again after a long dry spell. On November 12, 1981, Holden was alone in his seaside Santa Monica apartment, reportedly intoxicated, when he tripped on a throw rug and took a violent fall. He slammed his forehead against the edge of a bedside table with such force that it tore a gash in his scalp. Dazed and bleeding profusely, Holden either could not or chose not to call for help. The Los Angeles County coroner later determined that he remained conscious for at least 30 minutes after the fall, time enough perhaps to realize he was in mortal danger. But he was a private man to the end, unwilling to reach out. William Holden, the tough guy who prided himself on handling his own problems, simply succumbed to his injury in silence. He was 63 years old. It wasn't until 4 days later that a concerned apartment manager discovered the Oscar winner's body. The scene was grim. Holden had bled to death from a nasty head injury, alone, on the floor. News of his death sent shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond. That this elegant, vital star could perish in such an undignified manner seemed almost unbelievable. "It was a lousy death," said Billy Wilder in an uncharacteristically emotional statement. Wilder, who had discovered and directed Holden in some of his finest roles, delivered a moving, unofficial eulogy, calling William Holden an endangered species, the beautiful American. In Wilder's eyes, Holden was the last of a breed, a troubled but genuine and modest man who never quite realized how special he was. Holden's wishes were for no funeral or public memorial. As he requested, his remains were quietly cremated and his ashes scattered over the Pacific Ocean he loved to sail. Audrey Hepburn, true to form, made no public comment. Stephanie Powers was bereft but held it together well. Within months, she transformed the Mount Kenya Game Ranch into the William Holden Wildlife Foundation, ensuring that Bill's conservation dream lived on. To this day, it has educated thousands of Kenyan students and continues to operate on the foothills of Mount Kenya. In the end, as Billy Wilder said, William Holden was authentic. He was, flaws and all, a beautiful American, one whose life continues to fascinate, educate, and caution those who follow in his footsteps. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know a lot of you were campaigning hard for Bill to be the subject of episode 100, and he just missed out on that, so I thought I'd make him 101 instead. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already, and if you want some extra Hollywood stories, then check out what I have on offer over on Patreon and for my YouTube members. On the $3 tier, you get an extra weekly podcast episode, so sign up for the 7-day free trial on Patreon and see if you enjoy it. I've been Ava. Until next time, sweet dreams.